Hello, so we start our new lesson of this course as a process. Since I said this is a continuation of a class of translation one that you had last term as a prerequisite class to translation two, we continue from where you ended your first translation based on information that they had from your department and university as well. Because I was not your instructor for translation one, of course. So today, for our first lecture or lesson, we'll talk about the different steps of translation, a process. So we would start with the process of translation. The process of translation, you know, um, um, so you know that whenever we meet with a text that needs to be rendering to a, a, a target language or vice versa, either from Arabic into English or English into Arabic, you may ask the question, or we may ask a question, that how we proceed translation, how we do it. You know, there are different ways to translate based on different perspectives. Some would think that we do it word for word, a sentence for sentence, or a clause by clause, and some would say that's not the way we should do it. You know, um, so as I said, many would proceed word by word, and that's a excerpt was taken from Ghazala's book, textbook. If you want to go over it very quickly, please, so you can understand it, because I'm trying to explain it in my presentation. You know, he said, in fact, Ghazala's opinion, we don't proceed this way. We don't proceed word for word or sentence for sentence. We actually proceed a unit by unit. And that's so we can make a good translation of a text. Because sometimes you find it sort of um, that your translation wouldn't look good. يعني بتكون ركيكة شوية الترجمة. لما تنقلها بكلمة بكلمة تختلف. So each unit is called a unit of, so we proceed a unit by unit, and that's what we call a unit of translation. So that we will clarify in our next slide, how we do a real translation. Okay, and please try to go between lines and read the text and get to know what I was saying. Let's move into second slide. So here is our second slide, the unit of translation, the one that we've been talking about in first slide, at the end of first slide. You know, as I said, if you cut your sentences, or if you do a translation word for word without considering the text as a unit, you may not deliver a good translation. All we need to do is to do a unit of translation. In order to give a full meaning of something that you're translating, you should consider doing it as a unit. Otherwise, your translation wouldn't be good. So a unit of translation, according to Ghazala, is any word or a group of words that can give either a small or a large part meaning of a sentence. Therefore, it's a unit or part of meaning which can be taken together and understood independently. It marks a stop we take at translating to write down a meaningful part of a sentence that's not affected by or dependent. So you see, when we do it as a unit, we can have a good translation, and we can't break the parts of a sentence. Sometimes if we have a clause, okay, you can't just do a word for word translation and forget about the other clause of a sentence. So that's why we're recommended to do the unit of translation, or we translate the text as a unit, other than we proceed into a word for word or phrase for phrase. Examples in the book, if you go back to the book and read under the unit of translation, you will see different examples that was given for more of a clarification. And we may proceed to our next slide to clarify things in a more elaborate way. To support the claim that we can't, we or the claim or recommendation to do a sort of translation as a unit, we can have what some of the scholars of translation have argued here. In practical terms, the largest unit of translation is the sentence, for it's the basic unit of thought. This was said by Newmark, not that close. So when we do a word for word, we may not get the whole meaning of a sentence. Nor and Bell have said, nor the text, or sorry, Hatim and Mason. Yet from time to time we might have clear-cut clause word lines in a sentence where clauses are separated parts of meaning that can be taken as a unit of translation. So let's look at the last two lines. At times, we may need to resort to the whole text to understand the sentence. Of course, if you do it a word for word or phrase for phrase, you as a translator, you may not get the meaning of that phrase or a word until you go back and read and do sort of text analysis. You may want to read some of the margins so you can grasp the meaning of what, or the intention meaning of the speaker or the writer. Because as a translator, you need to have a good or solid background regarding the intention of a text. Yet this is the exception, not the rule, of course. Yeah, sometimes we need to go back again and again, read the text so we can get the whole meaning, and that's what's been recommended to do, or to proceed translation for. We deal with it as a unit, but not as a word for word, a clause by clause, etc. And of course, practice makes perfect. So the more you practice, the more you do practice. You do it consecutive interpreting, or interpreting الفورية الترجمة الفورية أو التتابعية. You know, it takes time. I mean, practice can master it. And yeah, so after we introduced key notes on the process of translation, and how we do to proceed to translate the text to anything we face as a beginners of translating or translators. You know, we always face, of course, challenges and difficulties, and Ghazali has touched on some of the translation problems, and he offered solutions for students in order to overcome such hardship or challenges. And he has been arguing and discussing these problems faced by translators or beginners of translation. And as you know, this textbook is mainly directed to translation trainees and college students. So, translation problems. What are the translation problems we face? He argued translation problem is any difficulty we come across at translating that invites us to stop translating in order to check, recheck, reconsider. You need to do double checking when you translate something in order to avoid problems. You may need to recheck it, you may need to consult a reference, you may want to consult a dictionary, a special dictionary, some that would have a medical terms. For instance, if you translating something in medicine, you may consult. Dictionaries are different, or rewrite it. Sometimes you would write. The structure is different. You may write with a certain structure, and then after you read it again and again, you think your structure may need a modification, or use a dictionary or reference of some kind to help us overcome it and make sense of it. It's anything in the source language text which forces us to stop translating. So whenever we meet with a problem in the source language, المصدر يعني لغة المصدر، لما نقول السيال is an abbreviation to source language. المصدر اللي هي بننقل منها إلى into target. TL is a target language. So yeah, sometimes we stop when we face such problems. We stop at certain stations. Again, a translation problem can be posed by grammar. Sometimes we face problems with grammars, words, word selection, or word choice. We may put the inappropriate word that doesn't go with the text, or even the style of the أسلوبية الكلام يعني style, or sound. Sometimes the sound is different. Sometimes we misspell the word. Thus, or therefore, we have grammatical, lexical with مفردات, stylistic, and phonological problems. So in this case, we may want to recheck our translation in order to avoid such problems. Ghazala in his textbook offers examples. You may want to read the text, offers solutions for such problems. So here I give you some problems posed, from a text, like that has to do with grammatical problems, some complicated source language grammars. Some of the sentences of a source language are structured differently from a target language. For instance, of the 3 books you have recommended to me, I've chosen only one. من بين الكتب الثلاثة التي نصحتني بها اخترت واحدا فقط. Starting the sentence with of and postponing the main clause I've chosen to back position make it complex. The students of translation find it difficult to understand easily and directly. The point becomes clearer at comparing it to the following normal direct structure, because English you can have in any language to restructure a sentence in a different way. Look at this sentence, hear me out. I have chosen only one of the 3 books you have recommended to me. اخترت واحدا فقط من بين الكتب الثلاثة التي نصحتني بها. Where the main clause is right at the beginning. So it's different from a structure that started with the preposition of. Again, another problem that may face you, different target language grammar. Most English tenses, for example, don't exist in Arabic grammar. يعني بعض الأزمنة اللي موجودة في اللغة الإنجليزية غير موجودة في اللغة العربية. Also, all English sentences are verbal. That's to say, should include a main verb each, whereas in Arabic they're either verbal or nominal. يعني في اللغة العربية جملة فعلية واسمية، بينما في الإنجليزية تجدها جملة فعلية وعندها فعل أساسي وفعل كينونة. Likewise, some modal auxiliaries have no grammatical equivalent. Again, in another difficulty or differences in between languages, different target language word order. The word order تنظيم أو نسق الكلمات. متى نجول الصفات احنا الصفة في اللغة الإنجليزية smart student طالب ذكي تسبق الصفة تسبق الموصوف، بينما في اللغة العربية الصفة تلحق الموصوف. يعني بعض الطلاب يقول من الأخطاء الشائعة يجيب في الترجمة يقول لك smart student، يقول لك بدل من طالب ممتاز يقولوا ممتاز طالب لما تنقلها إلى الترجمة، وهذه هفوات يعني يديروا فيها الطلاب موجودة. For example, all English sentences usually start with the subject followed by the verb, so subject, verb, and complement, whereas in Arabic, verbal sentences normally have a verb first and then a subject. ذهبت إلى السوق مثلا. I went to market. Another example is the possession of adjective. In English, it precedes noun, while it proceeds in Arabic, as I said. The example is البيت نظيف. The house is clean. So you see, among the important and frequent grammatical problems translation discussed in the first chapter are the following. Translation of verbs. You had it, you should be, or you should have it in your translation 1 class. So one more type of difficulties or problems we're facing is lexical problems. You know, sometimes we have problems with lexicals or with words, literal translation of meaning. Sometimes when you do a literal translation, الترجمة الحرفية doesn't give a meaning, doesn't give a full meaning. ما تعطيش معنى كويس. يعني على سبيل المثال أو من باب الفكاهة، مرة واحد قال where are your eyes؟ أين عينيك؟ ترجمتها is literal, doesn't make sense to in a target language. So this is a funny example I was saying. We have synonyms. Words which have a same or similar meaning are called synonyms. Bose's problems concerning the difference between the levels of closeness or absolute identification and the meanings of synonymous words compared with another, the same language as well as between the two languages. Blasphemy and monosemy, a word which has more than one meaning is described as blasphemy. مثلا على سبيل المثال spring تعني يقفز، ربيع، نبع. On the other hand, a word which has only one meaning is monosemous. Telephone, hat. Proper translation arises when a polysemy word is mistaken for a monosemous one, with one meaning wrongly assigned to it in all text and context. We have a problem with collocations. Two or more words which usually occur together in a language are called collocation. We have a problem with idioms. You know, idioms poses problems, phrases which have fixed forms, يعني عندها معاني ثابتة, and special meanings that can't be known from the direct meaning of their words are called idioms. To walk on water يصنع المعجزات. شفت to walk on water يجي حد يترجمها ترجمة literal يقول يمشي على الماء، هي لا ما تعطيش معنى يعني، لكن في الواقع هي يصنع المعجزات معناها. They also include phrasal verbs like get on, get off, get out, get up, etc. They can sometimes be quite problematic for students. يعني اللغة الاصطلاحية يسمى فيها idiomatic expressions أو التعابير الاصطلاحية. يعني زي ما نقولوا I'm up to my ears يعني غارق لأذني، معناها مشغول في الواقعية، لكن لو بجيت ترجمها أنا لا ما doesn't make sense. So idiomatic expressions have fixed forms, and these are the problems that we face as beginners of translation, and as Ghazala touched on them, so that he wants you to avoid them. Proverbs أيوة. Proverbs are popular facts sayings، أقوال ثابتة حتى هي الأمثلة الشعبية مثلا. They are a part of culture. This you need to know some sort of culture. They have their own problems of translation for everybody. Metaphors, oh my god, are in direct, non-literal language. Don't ever think to translate the metaphors as literal. كحرفية مستحيل. They're used to say something but something else. هم يقول لك شيء لكن هي تعني شيء آخر. You know? I see him مثلا sorry, they're usually quite problematic and difficult for students. Technical translation or Arabization of scientific terms pose considerable problems, some of which are still unsolved in the translation of many technical terms. Methods are suggest tackle these problems, you know. So please go over the materials of Hassan Ghazali that you had downloaded from internet. This you find on page, the one I was talking, you find it in page 2019. Yeah. So we have under lexical problems, we have proper names or titles, political establishment, geographical terms, and acronyms. These pose some problems translation that the student must take care of. Translation and culture, wow, is a big, a huge a topic. Culture is you should be aware of culture whenever you do a translation of any sort. Like if you're translating from Chinese into English, you need to understand the culture of Chinese and the culture of English people, or vice versa. The problem of translating cultural terms are among the most difficult lexical problems that are discussed and exemplified for in simple terms. Although the topic of culture is perhaps the most complicated to handle in translation, especially for the student, it's possible to introduce it in general, clear terms at the later stage of the curriculum. this slide is a continuation of a previous slide where I'm presenting the problems that we face as beginners of translation when translating a text. So we started with the grammatical problems. We offered the types of problems we face in grammar, and also the second type was what is it? Can you? Yeah. So that was the what is it again? Yeah. Come on. No. You need to revise your materials. Yes, it is the lexical problems. We offered the second type as a lexical problems. And we've mentioned the types of lexical problems that pose challenges and problems in translation, like literal translation of meanings, synonyms, blasphemy, collocation, etc. So our third type is stylistic problems. Stylistic problems. I will touch very quickly on it. And for more details, please check your textbook for detailed discussion. Ghazala, 1995. Stylistic. What's a stylistic problems? In a past, style was not considered as a part of meaning, but outside meaning. Nowadays, however, it's rightly and properly seen as a part and parcel of meaning. The latter view is adopted here in this textbook. The style of the source language text may pose problems for translators. And under stylistic problems, there are various types. Among these problems I'll name them in the following: formality versus informality. Sometimes you meet with the text that's written in standard English, and sometimes you are required to translate the text that's informal. It's not standard. Source language text can be either formal or informal, sometimes both. Formality and informality concern both grammar and words. The formality scale suggested by Jews in 1962 and its possible Arabic equivalent are discussed in detail now. So, yeah, the difference poses problems for students because of their little knowledge of formal and informal style of both grammars. These problems and their impact on meaning are spotted earlier. Another type is fronting. A word or phrase or a clause can be put at the beginning of a sentence in an unusual way, like suicide. As an example, suicide, he committed, instead of he committed suicide. So it's sort of fronting. They fronted. Such fronting is done on purpose to achieve a stylistic function of some kind. Emphasis of the fronted word or drawing attention to its special importance and meaning of a sentence. Sometimes we do fronting to pose emphasis or try to grasp the attention of the reader or the audience or interlocutors. So this one more type is called parallelism. Two clauses or sentences may have the same structure and author for parallel. Such style of parallelism is not always easy to translate, and may have its problems in Arabic. It has stylistic function which can be directly relevant to meaning. So parallelism متوازي، يعني بالتوازي عندهم تركيبة متزنة متوازية. Again, we have a lapse, what we call in Arabic lapse, الغموض في الجملة، يعني ambiguity. One of the common but difficult problems to this style of ambiguity you may meet with the structures that have a different meaning. Their meaning beyond the structure. We call it the deep structure and surface structure. الظاهرة، التركيبة الظاهرة تعطي معنى ولكن في العمق فيها معنى آخر. So ambiguity, some of the texts that have requires some other contextual keys to interpret the text. It may cause misunderstanding, confusing, losing or disappearing meaning. Therefore, it's important to discuss here under stylistic problems rather than under lexical problems. We have also another type is called complex versus simple style. There's a great different stylistic effect. You need to render it into Arabic at two different styles. And we have style of short and long sentences. Each of these two styles has its own translation problems and stylistic effects. That is why they have to be retained in Arabic. Students are required to avoid confusing or ignoring them by joining short sentence into one long sentence or dividing a long sentence into short sentence. Passivization, passive versus active. Two contrastive styles. هذين نوعين يعني مختلفتين. المبني للمعلوم والمجهول. It's not true that in Arabic the passive is usually changed into active. Repetition and variation. Some words are repeated in the source language text to reflect a function of some kind. The style of repetition is taken in comparison to that of variation. And also redundancy. الحشو يعني redundancy is حشو الكلام، كثرة الإطناب يسموه في اللغة العربية. The use of unnecessary extra words to express something is called redundancy. الإطناب usually is disposed of in translation, but this sometimes you repeat the same again and again, the same words, the same expressions, and that distort the flavor of your text. يعني يفسد ملامح أو جمال أو حس النص اللي أنت يا طالبة أو أنت يا طالب تحاول نقله إلى اللغة الأخرى. باهي. Another type of under the stylistic style is show muscles. This concerns the use of expressive words in unsuitable context for unsuitable readers, such as the translation of problems increased أدلهمت الخطوب instead of زادت المشاكل بكل بساطة. يعني instead of show muscles. In a text for not highly educated people, this style is inappropriate and harms translation. يفسد ترجمة. Nominalization versus verbalization is the use of nouns dominantly in a source language, whereas verbalized style is when verbs are dominant. The style of irony, the translation of punctuation. Yes, punctuation marks are meaningful with stylistic function. Later, maybe in a common, this is just introductory notes about the challenges or problems, okay? And later we'll have a detailed discussion of these problems. Each type will have a separate, we may have a separate lecture in the coming lectures. I'll give you some examples, so no worries. And also you're required. You can't wait for me to offer you everything. You have a text, you need to do searching. You're now independent learners. You need to be independent. You need to look for knowledge, for information, and if you have a problem or if you guys face a problem, please do ask questions. The translation of punctuations, okay. Now, so these are the most types of stylistic or most of the problems that are under the problem of styles. Now we're moving into phonological problems. These are problems that are concerned with sounds and their relation to an effective meaning. They're assigned separate chapter. Okay. Okay. So, as to the beauty of language, especially in poetry and certain texts of rhythmical language, however, 2 points should be made here about the problems. So we only have 2 points under phonological problems. You know, in the language of advertisement or advertisement في لغة الإعلانات أو الصحافة غالبا ما تجدون الكلمات يعني مقطعة أو قصيرة، فهذه ممكن تسبب مشكلة لعدم الفهم. They're difficult to imitate or reflect in Arabic for the new students if translate first stage of learning. At an advanced stage, the students can tackle these problems more easily, especially when simplified. Number 2, they are limited to advertising, literature, especially poetry, and to a small number of general texts. Yet they may be influential or meaning, but not as influential as the other 3 types discussed above, like styles or grammars. So this is a less type of type of problems. So please go ahead and go over the presentation, go back to your text, read it, spend some time on it, 1 hour, 2 hours, read it again and again, and try to understand, break down the materials. The presentation will help you to guide you to, my explanation and to, now we're offering the problems that we're facing when we translate. Sorry, I got a cold. In later presentations or lectures, we would start to offer the solutions to such problems. We'll take examples. We'll take real examples. We will comments on translation problems, solution and translation problems. And that's we'll see what we offer for next slide or our second lecture later. We're trying to so please try to listen carefully, take notes, read your materials again and again, make a bit of effort. Now you're growing up, you're in a college students where you're required to do a research. You can't wait for your teachers to spoon feed you أن يطعموكم. يعني هذا مش مرحلة تعلم، مرحلة البحث عن المعلومة. Okay, thank you. Stay safe and smart. Work smart. Talk to you soon. Bye.